go, but uh, unexpected hangups today. I don't even know if I'm gonna have the time to get through everything that I wanted to get through, especially without distractions, but we'll see. Anyway, like the title of this says, I just wanted to revisit some of the things that I've talked about on this channel, but like with a new perspective on it. Yeah, honestly, I probably shouldn't be doing this right now because I probably need a long time to really go over everything, but maybe not. Let's see if I can condense it. So like, okay, one thing that I wanted to touch on specifically was the whole concept of, actually, no. So, first I think I wanted to explain that now that I've come to the understanding that the patriarchy is a lot more prevalent than I ever really considered or knew or anything. And now that I see how much of an effect it has had on the world, hence, me realizing that, decentering men, and then feeling more at peace now. But it made me look at things in a different way. And it's interesting because, okay, so like, for example, I did a video on why I feel like fathers are really important. And I think that everything that I said in that video does make sense considering the fact that we do live in a patriarchy. However, I've come to I've come to a new conclusion, and unfortunately, I feel like it doesn't actually. Okay, let me put it this way. I think that what I said is still valid and it still makes sense because of the world that we're currently in right now. And again, that is one that is very patriarchal. I feel like I'm saying that word wrong every time. But essentially, what I'm trying to say with that is, so I feel like the biggest problem now really is that we put too much emphasis on men in every way, and we really do ignore the male nature a little too much. And here's what I mean by that. So when it comes to the concept of fathers being important, right? I think that the issue with that, and I mean, I think I talked about it in the initial video, but it's like fathers need to be there, but, they're not always. And in those cases where they're not, it could either be because he was never there in the first place, or he left somewhere down the line, or he's there physically, but like not emotionally / mentally, or he's there, but he's a bad influence, right? And it's like, if we go along with the whole stance of a man being the natural protector and provider, which I no longer think is true, but if we were to go along with that, then does it make sense that that is such a common occurrence? Like, it's such a common occurrence that like a man will have a family and then just leave it. a lot of times for another woman, or just like check out with the relationship. You know, I mean, if you're supposed to be leading it, then whatever issues you're having, whether they be like personal, emotional issues that you're going through that make you struggle or whatever, you're supposed to be working through that and still doing what you need to do, still being that leader and provider. But, you know, it seems as if it's true that that's just not naturally what men are wired to do. And so, you know, so when it comes to needing fathers, because I've been talking a lot about Princella lately, and I'm not going to stop because I'm still listening to her, and I just feel like the things that she says makes a lot of sense. And I'll say it again, that I don't think, so one thing, I was watching a video today, and she did say that she doesn't speak in absolute, she speaks in majorities and statistics, which I think was a good thing to hear, because that was kind of, I felt like it was implied with different things that she said, but it was nice to hear her actually say it, because I feel the same way, in the sense that, no, I don't think that it's all men, right? I do think that there are men who are capable, there are men who can step up and do step up, and those, I think, are great men, they're great examples, but I do think that the men who are those really good, really great men are ones who are like that because they have ascended above their nature. And unfortunately, I do feel like there are a lot of men who haven't. And I think that it's the reason why, there's so many issues. And I feel like I should also mention too that I don't necessarily think that when it comes to a man's nature and everything, that he's necessarily going to be like the worst, right? Where he's going to be violent, he's going to be abusive, whatever, right? Honestly, I think, and I could be wrong here, I don't know statistics, but I do think that generally what's gonna be the biggest and most common issue is gonna be infidelity. Just the fact that by nature men they don't desire monogamy. And if we look at nature, that does make sense, right? Because in nature, men, their whole thing is spreading their seed. But then women are more geared towards monogamy in the sense that, they want, most of the time, if they are going to get a man, they want the best man that they can get, With that being said, though, I'm moving this into my conversation about, like marriages and stuff. So I have said that I believe in marriage, and that I think that the world currently right now is going in a way where it's really not geared towards that. And, it's all just a mess, right? And I very much blamed hookup culture and stuff like that. And I think that, okay, let me put it like this. I still hate hookup culture. I still think it's an issue. I think, and interestingly enough, things that Princella says, I feel like also support what I'm saying, in the sense that, as I've said, I don't think that women specifically should be going around having sex with just whoever, because it messes up everything. It's not a purity thing. It's a, is he worth it thing? And a lot of times he's not. And it just messes up everything. So, you know, so yeah, I mean, it's like, I still hate hookup culture. I still think it messes up everything. And, Princella has gone a lot into detail about why. I'm not going to bother in this because it's too long of an explanation. Really, I think she'd be a better person to hear it from anyway. But with that being said, when it comes to the idea of marriage, here's what I think, right? Because I know she says that it goes against nature, it's man-made, etc. And I agree, right? It does, and it is man-made. It's not really true. It doesn't align with nature. But here are my thoughts on it. I still think that it's a nice concept. I like the concept of it. I don't find it very practical, though. I don't find it very realistic. I think, if for no other reason than for the male's nature and the urge to, want to always go find better, or sometimes not even better, but just something else, it just ruins the whole thing. But I think the concept of finding one person and wanting to dedicate yourself to that person, to each other, to bettering each other in an interdependent relationship, I think that is a really beautiful thing, And I think that even if the relationship were to be a dependent one in certain senses, as long as it was done in like a healthy way, and what I mean by that is one person isn't going to try to take advantage of the power dynamic that would go on there. As long as that were to not happen, I think that could be okay too. Although ideally, I do think that interdependent is the best. But I think that two individuals coming together to, just because they like each other and they want to, be with each other, I think that is a beautiful thing. I really do. But like I said, I don't think it's realistic. I don't think it's practical. And I think that's really sad and unfortunate. But I also think that it is what it is, right? I mean, ideally, I've talked about how I don't center men anymore. And I don't, right? I don't center them. I'm not waiting on some unicorn man who's different from the rest, who, isn't going to be abusive in some way, isn't going to cheat, etc. I'm sure he exists. And, and I'm also attracted to him, but, I'm sure he exists, but he'd have to like me back, and we'd have to come across each other and just, so I'm not waiting on that. But, if I were to, well, no, let me put it correctly. If he were to find me, then it would be nice to be in a partnership with someone like that. I do think that it would be nice if that were actually possible. And I think that for people who have managed to find that, that's really nice. That's good for them. I wish that everyone could be in a relationship like that. But with that being said, if you're listening to this, you may or may not be surprised by what I'm going to say. I don't know. I actually have always felt this way, but I never really verbalized it. But so even though I like the concept of marriage, right? I don't think that most people should be getting married. Let me explain. See, especially for a man. If you know that you can't be faithful, you're not willing to be faithful, you're not going to be faithful, don't get married. Honestly, you shouldn't even be in a relationship, period. Like, there shouldn't even be this boyfriend-girlfriend phase, because you know that you don't want to be faithful. So don't get in a commitment and break someone's trust, right? Like, don't do that. Just don't, like, honestly, people don't need to be in relationships. Most people don't need to be in them. It's not, let me clarify. I'm not saying that relationships are bad. I think that relationships are good. The concepts of these things are good. The concept of being, in a partnership, in a marriage, whatever, these concepts are good, but they're not for everyone. Commitment is for people who are actually going to be committed. If you're not going to be committed, then don't get in a commitment. It's really that simple. Do not get in a commitment with someone knowing that you're breaking it, even if they don't know you're breaking it. Because you're just betraying that person. It's crazy. It's actually ridiculous. Okay? So just stay single. If you're going to be living a single life, just stay single. If you're going to act like you're single but be in a commitment, you're just being selfish. Whether you're the man or the woman. If you're doing that, you're just being selfish. So that's why most people do not need to be in committed relationships, because they don't actually commit. Right? And in addition to that, I'm going back to the whole thing about hookup culture, because, and it also, it goes into male nature again, right? Because here's the thing. I think that, like when I refer to men who ascend above their nature, with that said, I do think that if more men were disciplined, then more men would be able to ascend above their nature. Now, because it is their nature, it is always within them, they are always capable. But if they have the tools in order to, not give in to that, then I think that's what's most important. That they have that within them, instilled within them. So, the discipline, I think, needs to happen. And, but without that without that inner discipline, right? If a man isn't going to discipline himself, or if he's not going to gain discipline, and he's not going to self-govern, right? If that's not something that's within him, or if that's not something that he chooses to do, if he is simply going to let his nature guide him. So even if he's in a relationship, if he sees a pretty girl and she comes on to him and he's just going to do it because, hey, it's a pretty girl, how could he turn that down? If he is doing that, then I do think that women need to be the ones who decide that they're not going to enable that behavior. Because, again, men, a lot of times, they're going to do what they can get away with doing. And that's why I say when women just give themselves up, when they're just going to throw themselves on men like this, what incentive do men have to change? They don't have any, because women are just running wild. I've been saying this. This is why I say a lot of the things I feel like she says, they have been in line with things that I've been saying. And I still think that that's true. I think I am probably more optimistic than she is, which is kind of ironic. But, I think I'm still realistic in the sense that, coulda, woulda, shoulda, right? Yes, there are a lot of things that I think would be nice. They should happen, like the discipline thing that I just mentioned, but that is not always the case, you know? And while ideally that would be good, and I think it would have a lot of good, if it's not happening and if it's not going to happen, then does it really matter? You know, that's my thing. So, you know, but if we go back to the father thing, right? Because I don't know if I really fully explained. So I think that because we live in a world where everything is so male centric, right? Where women do care so much about what men think and validation, and men also care what men think because, again, men are in the center, ignoring that whole thing about them, you know, not being present, whether physically or or emotionally for whatever reason. Even if we ignore that, right, and we just look at this whole concept of needing a father figure because a boy and a girl would both need that male example. You know, I think that, well, no, I guess I can't ignore it. He needs to be there. He needs to be there, right? But if the male nature dictates that he isn't going to be there, or he isn't going to be there the way that he should be, then, you know, that's an issue, right? Like, if the man of it, like, if the father needs to be around and then he's not going to be around, then we have an issue. But it kind of seems to me that if we decenter the man, right? Even for men, I feel like, then what happens? Because what I said before was that for a girl, it's important for her to have her father because, you know, most likely she's going to grow up and, you know, she'll end up liking a guy, or guys will like her, and it'll be good for her to have her father to give her the information that she needs, the love, the affirmation, the example for when she goes out and deals with other men who may want to pursue her or whatever. But I mean, again, that's putting a lot on having the woman focus on guys and men and boys in the first place. If she's not even interested, if she hasn't centered men, then I feel like all of that from him doesn't matter as much. Now, as I said that, you know, I do still think, because, you know, as I've stated, I've been learning a lot about men. And while I don't have any desire to open myself up to that, really, I do find that the knowledge about them in general is extremely useful to have. Unfortunately, though, it seems to me that even when fathers are around, they're still not actually teaching their daughters about men the way that daughters need to be taught. I'm not saying it never happens, but from what I can see and tell, it's not happening nearly as much as it needs to be. Because if it was, I don't think that a lot of girls would be getting into the relationships with guys that they're getting into them with. Because they're really not very good. They're really not. They're not good. So, you know, I do think that that's an issue. And as far as, you know, men needing men, well, I was going to say something about that, but then I remembered a point that Princella made. And so I do feel that men do need other men. So, I'll say that. But, you know, like I've said, I think that the whole concept of women competing with other women, I do think that it mostly comes down to it happens because of men, a lot of times feeling unconfident. It comes from the whole thing of dealing with men. I know for me, I felt unconfident in the way that I looked because I was basing it on my desirability and proximity to a man. Because as I've stated before, I am not a preference. And so it made me very self-conscious because I wanted a man, but I know that I'm not really what is wanted by men. But now that I am not male centric, it has allowed me to be more loving towards myself. And now I can see and admit that I am beautiful. I can also admit that not everyone will see that beauty because of the systems that have been put in place and, what the world considers beautiful and why, right? So it won't be seen. But because I have decentered men, I now no longer care, because before it was like, well, I realized it. I realized that, why these things were in place. But for me, it kind of didn't matter. It's like, okay, well, this might be why it's in place, but it still affects me, If I want a man, but he doesn't want me, then that sucks for me. But it leaves me, or it left me in a victim placement, right? A victim position. And there's really not anything I can do to make myself a preference. So it is what it is. There's really no point in let me rephrase that. I'm not a preference, and there's nothing I can do about that. But now that I have taken myself out, now that I no longer care about what men desire, my confidence has flourished. And I think that it's also helped as well, in a lot of ways, because if a man were to decide that he liked me or whatever, in a way, I feel like it's kind of better that I'm not a preference looks wise, because it means that I don't have to worry about the fact that he's getting with me just because, just looking at me, right? Just being with me, I give him status. That's not going to happen with me. It's not, right? Because I don't fit in. I don't have the hair. I don't have the skin tone, right? I am attractive, and it feels really nice to be able to say that about myself. I am attractive, but as I've stated, in this society, it doesn't seem to matter because I don't have the skin tone. Above all else, I don't have the skin tone, and so my attractiveness, it means a lot less because of that. But again, it means that if a man is interested in me, then just my looks alone, just him having me on his arm, quote unquote, isn't really gonna do much for him despite my attractiveness because of my skin tone. And so there has to be other things that he likes about me that I don't know if he's still going to look at me in a way of gaining resources or whatever. There would have to be something else about me other than my looks that he thinks is worthwhile or whatever. Like, he would actually have to like something about me as a person, or, well, at the very least, the way that I would do things, that would be the case. But I'm not gonna go into that so that someone can maybe use it against me if they hear it. But yeah. So, but I was really only able to get to this point because of my understanding now. And so, yeah, I mean, I've talked a lot about pretty privilege. I think, that touches on that, right? Because pretty privilege in itself, that is a very, male dependent validation thing, right? In the first place. So that is a result of that. I covered that. I've talked about the importance of fathers, and I talked about male nature, how that affects that, and unfortunately, I covered that. I talked about the whole thing with marriages and hookup culture. Oh, there was another thing I wanted to say about marriage, though. So, I think when it comes to marriage, right, as I said, I don't think that it's for most people. I do think that it's good, right? But I think that it's good for who it's good for, and not everyone needs to do it. Okay? I do think that. But with that being the case, I want to also say, so with that being said, like, I think that two people could be together, love each other a lot, and never get married, right? Like, that's also a thing. Like, even though I think that the concept of marriage is nice, I also can understand where there could be a lot of pitfalls in it. Specifically if you feel that at least one of you is going to step out of the relationship, then it's a lot easier to break away from that if you don't have legal ties, which, marriage makes a lot of those, right? So I don't think that marriage is necessarily necessary, even though I do think that it's a nice concept if done correctly and properly, which I don't think it's done that way a lot of times, because again, I think that there should be interdependence, and I think that both people should be contributing to the relationship in complementary ways, not necessarily equal, but complementary, which could be equal, but however that looks like for that couple, any kind of way that makes the overall relationship symbiotic, I think is the best case scenario. But I think since most people don't have that figured out, like I said, most people don't even need to be in basic relationships, let alone marriages. However, I also want to touch on this, though. I do think that if you're going to try to have a baby with someone, you should marry them for the sake of the stability of the child. Now, I want to make this clear as well, though. I don't believe in having a miserable marriage for the sake of a child, right? Like, I'm not saying like, oh, now that you're pregnant, even though you don't get along together very well, you should just force a marriage or whatever. That's not what I'm trying to say. But what I'm trying to say really is that you should not be having a baby with someone that you wouldn't be willing to marry. Like, if you're not even willing to marry them, then don't have a baby with them. So with that being said, if you're going to have a baby, then you should be able to get married, is what I'm saying. That said, if you do end up pregnant with someone, Don't get married just for the sake of getting married. But again, do not have a baby with someone that you would not be willing to marry. Because I really don't understand this concept of like I'll see these women who say like, oh, I didn't want to get married to this guy because he was whatever, but I had a baby for him. Like, what? The baby is more permanent than your marriage. What are you talking about? Like, I really don't get that. Like, seriously, this goes back to this whole thing of, is he worth it? These men are not worth you having a baby for them. They're not. You're better than that. You're worth more than that. Don't just have a baby for anyone. Like, I don't understand how people are putting marriage above a baby. I mean, I get there's the whole concept of, even though you have a baby, there's not like the legal system involved like it would be with a marriage. So I get that perspective, but at the same time, a lot of times people always like to say the thing of like, oh, well, marriage is just a piece of paper anyway, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, if we are going to look at it that way, then marriage is just a piece of paper, but a baby is permanent. Like, people like to say the thing of talking about like, oh, you're linked with this person for 18 years. No, you're linked for life. I don't care how old your child gets. They will always have both y'all DNA. No matter how old they are, that person will always be the reflection of both of y'all, will always have both of y'all DNA. Even if tragically that child were to go before you, the both of you, that is still a creation that y'all had together. That is a permanent link. Permanent. Even if one of y'all steps out of the child's life, or both of y'all, that is still something that y'all created together. You can't erase that. And like, I know you could argue, oh, well, I mean, if you got married and then, you get a divorce, you still got married, okay, but like, that's different, because it's like, look, you were married, now you're not. But the kid is, what can you do to take, the marriage was just the status, right? You could take that away. How you can't take the DNA out your child. It's your child. So again, I'm just saying that I think if you're planning to have a baby with somebody, I do think you should get married, because legally I think it's going to make it easier for everybody involved. With that being said, don't marry somebody just because you're pregnant, if y'all don't get along. But considering I don't think you should be having babies with somebody that you wouldn't be willing to marry, I don't think it should be a problem at the end of the day. So I understand why a person wouldn't want that they're working. It really is jacked up in general. I feel like it needs to be reevaluated. Probably don't need to be all these relationships. They're not real relationships anyway, because there's so much cheating involved. It's actually crazy. I wish standards were higher, specifically on the women's side, because listen, I feel like it's specific. I know men complain, but I feel like women especially, specifically, because listen, men always be talking about how they got options and they can just find another girl, and really they don't even need to find one, because they already talking to her, even when they talking to one girl already, right? So he already is talking to multiple girls. But my thing is, it's women who are the ones who are staying faithful to these guys, who are getting dogged out. It's women talking about how, well, I think talking more so the most about how the dating pool is full of piss and it's so terrible and blah, blah, blah. And I definitely agree. But I still think that, women have a big part to play in that, because again, you know, if women aren't going to have standards and set them, then these men they don't have incentive to be better. How are women going to complain about how bad the men are, but then contribute to how bad the men are? The men will step up if women step up their standards. Like, it'll happen. But whatever. I've had that conversation already, because that part of it didn't change. But anyway, like I said, I just wanted to revisit a few different topics with a slightly different perspective on it. Even with, like I've talked about with friendships too, when it comes to female friendships, I think a lot of times if they don't work out, the reason really is a lot of times because you'll have, and I have personal experience with this, you'll have women who put all of their focus, all of their validation, all of their self-worth in a man. And so they don't truly value their friends the way that they should. Instead, they value a man, which means that if a man ever comes into their life, that is who they're going to pour all of their essence into. And their friends really aren't going to mean anything. Their friends may just be used as stepping stones in the first place, or just like a way to spend the time or whatever else. So friendships, I feel like they're not as strong between women because of the allegiance being placed on men rather than women. And again, even with me saying, the whole thing with men and women hating women and liking men, it's the same thing, because we're in this patriarchy and men are considered, as high as they are. Women, they want men, and then men want other men too, because that's who they value. And then women have been so devalued that men don't really like women other than to use them for resources. And then women don't like other women because they just see them as competition. Plus, they have just been deemed as lower value anyway. So it's combinations of things like that. And so it's very unfortunate. And even though, again, I could go in a lot more detail about these things, I really just wanted to do a broad or relatively broad look at just a lot of different things that I've said. Maybe not everything on my channel, but I think for the most part, these are the things that I've talked about. And I wanted to revisit, at least in some capacity. Maybe at another point I'll do it again, or in a deeper one, or whatever. But I feel like for a lot of the things that I'm saying, checking out Priscilla, the High Powered Podcast, would really be a better thing, because she goes into so much depth about it and has research and knowledge to back up what she says. And I don't know. I know I always mention her, but she has talked about, wanting people to spread the message, but wanting to have them talk about where they got the information. And I would think that it would be wrong for me to talk about this, knowing that I've been so inspired by her, and to not give her props when she has put so much effort into the knowledge that she has gained over the years. And even though, as I've said, a lot of thoughts are my own, but they've just blended with things that she said, when I do bring her in, I feel like it only makes sense to give credit where credit is due. And so that is what I'm doing. But it is late for me. I need to go to work in the morning, and I really should have done this earlier like I wanted to, but I didn't really have the opportunity. But with that being said, I feel like I have said enough for one day. So if you happen to listen to this, I hope you enjoyed, got something out of it. If you want to leave a comment, feel free. I just ask that you be respectful. And aside from that, again, thanks for listening and have a good one.